Let's jump right into a fascinating piece of historical detective work. We're looking at B.R. Ambedkar's groundbreaking text, Beef, Brahmins, and Broken Men. It connects the modern food politics we see on Indian university campuses directly back to ancient, long-forgotten mysteries. It challenges deeply held assumptions about caste, society, and, honestly, what people actually ate thousands of years ago. At the very heart of all this is one massive question. How exactly did the cow become the center of India's oldest social division? We're going to explore the surprising and frankly mostly hidden origins of untouchability. We'll look at the clues left behind in ancient texts to see how something as basic as food became a tool for profound social marginalization.
Section 1. The modern beef protests and Dalit assertion today.
To really get a grip on the past, we first need to look at the present, specifically the highly charged political tension around beef consumption on Indian university campuses over the last decade or so. Ambedkar's work highlights how student protests at places like Osmania University and Hyderabad Central University sought to reclaim beef as a symbol of Dalit pride. As the text reports, these students were pushing back against what they identified as right-wing vegetarian nationalism, using food festivals to assert their cultural rights and challenge the dietary norms being imposed on them.
And the stakes here are incredibly high. Take the 2012 JNU Beef and Pork Food Festival, which was organized by a group called the New Materialists. The source text outlines how marginalized students put these festivals together to challenge shrinking democratic spaces and state bans on cow slaughter. For them, it wasn't just about eating meat. It was a highly visible demand for equal space in the public sphere, a sphere these students argued was entirely dominated by Brahmanical food cultures.
Now, these protests are frequently met with severe institutional pushback. The book actually opens with the tragic 2016 death of student activist Rohit Vemula, who was deeply involved in these movements. Before taking his own life, he wrote that the assertion of Dalits has been met with these kind of cunning suppression all over India. It's a stark reminder that the history we're exploring isn't just stuck in the past. It has very real life-or-death consequences right now.
Section 2. Ambedkar's historical investigation and solving a cold case. So let's travel back in time. Ambedkar essentially acts as a historical detective here to solve a centuries-old cold case. He noted that while modern Orthodox Hindus see untouchability as normal, and liberal Hindus feel ashamed of it, nobody had actually investigated its true historical origins. It was just treated as something that always existed. But Ambedkar refused to accept that. He kicked off a pioneering investigation to uncover exactly why and how this intense system of social exclusion actually began. Here's the challenge he faced. Ancient Brahmanic texts often conceal, ignore, or rewrite the truth to favor the ruling classes, meaning direct confessions of how untouchability started just don't exist. To get around this dead end, Ambedkar relied on his trained imagination and what he called inferential evidence. He gathered survivals of the past, things like rituals, fragments of text, social habits, and pieced them together to make them tell the story of their birth. Ambedkar's analogy for this method is pretty brilliant. He compares the task to that of an archaeologist who constructs a city from broken stones or a paleontologist conceiving an extinct animal from scattered bones and teeth. He totally refused to accept that a lack of direct textual confession somehow meant a lack of historical truth.
Section 3. The Broken Men Theory and the Prime Suspects.
This brings us to the prime suspects in our historical mystery, a group Ambedkar identifies as the Broken Men. Back in ancient times, society was transitioning from nomadic tribes to settled agricultural communities. And during this massive shift, tribal wars broke out. The people who lost these wars were fractured from their kin. Ambedkar calls these defeated tribesmen the broken men. They were forced into a very fragile, highly transactional relationship with the newly settled farming communities. Because ancient tribal communities were built strictly on blood relations, these defeated men couldn't just blend in and assimilate. Instead, they were permitted to establish homes, but strictly outside the village borders. In exchange for shelter, they had to act as watchmen, providing defense against other hostile tribes. And their payment? They were paid in food, specifically the flesh of dead village cattle. This arrangement placed them physically and socially on the absolute fringes of society. Section 4. Did ancient Hindus eat beef? Busting a modern myth. To understand how these broken men eventually became classified as untouchables, we really have to bust a major modern myth. Today, the dominant perception is that Hindus have always revered the cow and been strictly vegetarian.
But Ambedkar uses ancient Brahmanic texts themselves, texts like the Rig Veda, as smoking gun evidence. The ancient reality is that early Indo-Aryans and Brahmins were not only meat eaters, they actively and frequently sacrificed cattle.
A perfect example of this is the Madhuparka. This was an ancient, highly essential ceremony for welcoming esteemed guests, kings, or honor in a marriage. And according to the texts, this ritual absolutely necessitated the killing of a cow. It wasn't some weird anomaly, it was a codified religious requirement to offer beef to your most respected visitors.
These ancient texts directly contradict the modern assumption of eternal Hindu vegetarianism. There's this line in the Manava Griha Sutra that literally states, "Without flesh, it is not Madhuparka." The sacred texts have said this. There is zero ambiguity here. Ancient Brahmins were the primary orchestrators of these sacrifices and were enthusiastic consumers of beef.
Section 5. The pivot to cow worship and a strategic rivalry.
Which raises a massive question. If ancient Brahmins ate beef and sacrificed cows, why on earth did they suddenly stop? Well, Ambedkar's investigation reveals a brilliant, if highly cynical, strategic religious rivalry. During the Vedic period, animal sacrifice was widespread, but then comes the rise of Buddhism, and where Ashoka starts limiting animal sacrifices, and Buddhism's egalitarian message and respect for animal life severely threatens Brahmanic supremacy. To survive and counter this threat, the Brahmins executed a massive cultural pivot. They adopted strict vegetarianism and elevated the cow to a sacred status, explicitly to outdo the Buddhists and regain the moral high ground in the eyes of the masses.
Section 6. The origin of untouchability and the tragic climax. This strategic pivot by the upper castes brings us to the tragic climax of our investigation. Let's see how this trap actually closes. First, remember those broken men living outside the village? They were still socially obligated to carry away the dead cows for the settled communities. Second, when the Brahmins gave up beef, the broken men simply could not afford to imitate them. The dead cattle were their primary source of sustenance. Giving it up meant literal starvation. Finally, because they continued to eat beef, the newly vegetarian upper castes branded them with the ultimate stigma: untouchables. The broken men were trapped by poverty and obligation, only to be marginalized by a society that had strategically changed its own rules. And that brings us right back to where we started, leaving us with a profound question. How do ancient food politics continue to shape modern human rights and social justice today? Ambedkar's text shows us that untouchability wasn't some natural occurrence. It was a manufactured historical process born out of religious rivalry and dietary shifts. Understanding the true hidden origins of this division is the very first step toward addressing the deep inequalities that continue to spark protests on university campuses right now. So what do you think? Does knowing this history change how you view these modern protests? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, keep questioning the history you've been taught.